I just thought, this is a great day in clinical practice. And then only seconds later, I thought to myself, if this is as good as it gets, is it good enough for the rest of my career? And really quickly, I realised that the answer was no.
So I Heard, a podcast for cattle vets, students and anyone interested in the dairy and beef industries. It's been brought to you by the Australian Cattle Vets, a special interest group of the Australian Veterinary Association. I'm agricultural journalist Prue Adams. Spoiler alert, Dr. Michael Laurence didn't stay in clinical practice. Hello again, I'm Prue Adams. As you'll hear, Mike Laurence traversed not just the world, but 3 phases of a career: the clinical, the academic, and now the industry. We cover a lot of ground in this chat, from pain management and animal welfare, through to his advice for younger vets that you're never really stuck. Good advice. I started by asking Mike about his current role with Meat Livestock Australia.
My role at MLA is basically to use farmer-derived levies and matching government funds to invest in research that provides some form of impact for the producers of livestock in Australia. So the job is essentially to find scientific questions that can be answered with research that have some kind of applicable value to the supply chain in this country. So there's kind of 2 kinds of research. There's discovery research, which is new groundbreaking stuff. It's kind of early development research. And then there's more the translational, applicable, impactful research. And that's the sort of stuff that I look for in the sheep, goat and beef industries to make a difference to the lives of the animals that we farm and also the productivity and the lives of the people that farm them. One of the favourite parts of my job is to actually go and visit the farmers that I'm investing on behalf of and see their properties and see their farms and get a sense of what they're doing and how I can help. So I find myself on a farm in Tasmania one week and then talking to a group of farmers in Broome or Kununurra the very next. So I get all over this country talking to farmers, and it's my favourite part of the job.
And I'm going to circle back to the animal welfare side of your job, which obviously is the main area of interest for you. But just going back to 1997, when you came out of Murdoch University in Western Australia after completing your vet degree, what did you want to do? Is this an area that you thought you would go in?
After 1997, I didn't go into research. I went into clinical practice, clinical mixed practice. I was always mostly interested in cattle practice. But as with most country jobs, you have to learn to be a jack of all trades. And I started my career in the wheat belt in a town called Narrogin, in the wheat belt of Western Australia, looking after all the animals, dogs and cats and budgies and horses and sheep and cows, and I was fortunate. I got to do everything. I learned to do all sorts of things that nowadays you just really don't get an opportunity to do as much of in mixed practice. So I got a pretty good foundation there for a couple of years and then moved on.
At one point you were in the UK and you were involved in the foot and mouth disease outbreak in the UK at the beginning of that, about 20 odd years ago.
So 2001 was the FMD outbreak. In 1997, when we graduated, we as a group, we were quite a close group of students, and my year group, we had lots of good friends, and we said, well, what should we do to catch up? And everyone said, well, why don't we meet in the UK in a couple of years' time, do a few years of practice there? And everyone thought that was a terrific idea. So we committed to meeting at midday on Australia Day, 2 years after we graduated, in Trafalgar Square, and just see who turned up. And 35 of us turned up on that day. And that started my 5 years of locuming backwards and forwards between Australia and the UK, mostly in the UK. And during that time, I put my hand up to help with the foot and mouth outbreak when it occurred in about, I think it was March 2001. I was locuming, I had the opportunity. So, when I could see the devastating impact of the disease, I volunteered to help. And they were desperate for vets, so they snapped me up. And it was an amazing experience.
And to what extent has that informed how you might be involved with an FMD outbreak if it were to happen, God forbid, in Australia?
It gave me some real life experience of dealing with an emergency disease, and it was hard and tiring, and the British did it their way. And at the time they made decisions which probably wouldn't be made today. So I think having been through that, I wouldn't say that I'm well equipped to deal with an outbreak in Australia, because I'm sure we would do it very differently nowadays. But I've got experience with emergency disease outbreaks, which I think would be translatable to any emergency disease. And, some of the challenges that we faced then would be challenges that we would face now. I think the experience of working during the foot and mouth outbreak left me with some fond memories, but also some difficult memories of the way we had to interact with not just the animals, of course. Many of them had to be slaughtered, but also the people who were dealing with the outbreak. So, I would bring some, I think, empathy for the trauma that had caused the farmers to something like that if it were to happen today, God forbid.
I'm intrigued as to what happened then that you wouldn't do now.
Well, I don't know if it's so much something I wouldn't do now, but probably what I would encourage is that the communication needs to be such that people understand why the authorities are doing what they're doing. Back there in England, we would turn up on farms and the people wouldn't know why we were there. And sometimes they were terrified and desperate. I'm sure it would be better now, but that was the thing that struck me the most, how sort of ill-informed the farmers actually were about what was happening to try and control the outbreak.
I think this is a common theme in the vet industry, that people think it's an industry that deals with animals, but it is ultimately dealing with people who deal with animals, isn't it? And therefore communication, and this is coming back time and again, the communication and the management of the people who are involved in the production of animals is just so vital.
The animals are the animals. They get sick, they get better. There are things we can do to treat them. But if the people that we're working with aren't on board with what we're doing, the animals don't get what they need. So in my role, let's look at what I'm doing now. I try and help to get smarter people than me answer scientific questions to help the animals. But if those methods or what you're going to do is not something that makes sense for the people that will ultimately be doing it, it's never going to happen. So you're quite right. It's important that you bring the people that you're working with along for the ride so that they're kind of invested in the outcome as well. And that's one of my challenges, working with both the scientists and the producers to find the sort of nexus between those two groups. So ultimately it benefits the animals. And, healthy, happy animals are more productive. So it works hand in hand with the productivity of the whole farming system as well.
Are you finding that there is more of an acceptance of the absolute necessity for good animal welfare now than maybe there was 20, 25 years ago? That's
a tough question. I sort of have a different opinion on different days. I think what's happening now is that there's much more of a social expectation that animals will be farmed in good conditions that meet good welfare standards. Now, the public doesn't always know what those are, but there is an expectation that it will happen. I think the producers of Australia understand this, and it's not with reluctance that they try and improve the welfare of the animals, because, I think it's pretty much across the board, the understanding that healthy, well looked after animals do better. But for some, it's a harder change to make than for others that are ahead of the curve in terms of using some of the new techniques that improve welfare, or using vaccines when otherwise they may not have, and things like that. So there is actually a spectrum of uptake of the enthusiasm towards improving welfare. I think there's always been that hasn't changed. There's just more of a necessity now. It's more of an expectation that attention will be paid to good welfare.
Has the action then of some of the animal welfare groups pushed that cause to a great degree, or do you think they've set it back?
Well, maybe a bit of both. I think there really is a place for advocacy groups and even activist groups, because they shine a spotlight on some of the things that do go wrong. I don't have a big problem with that. I think it's important that when there's a fundamental failure of our duty of care for animals, it gets called out. So I don't have a problem. Sometimes the methods are maybe a bit iffy, but there's absolutely a place for activism and welfare-associated groups, because they are almost the conduit between the farms and the farmers and the animals and the public. You know, they provide a lot of visibility over what's happening out there in industry. It's not always framed correctly, in my opinion, and sometimes reactionary decisions are made to the detriment of the animals. That certainly happened. But yes, there's a place for them.
Before you joined MLA, you were at Murdoch University, where you had studied beforehand, and you were focusing on the measurement of pain in surgical husbandry and disease management. What is it about that area of pain management, I suppose, that you found interesting and perhaps crucial in terms of the industries?
Measuring pain was one of my research interests while I was here, and we actually worked with MLA on a couple of projects. And part of the problem with a lot of the things that we work on to improve welfare is that it's a focus on pain. The other problem is that we still perform surgical husbandry because it's needed. You know, horns get removed, animals get castrated, sheep still get mulesed, and tails still get cut off. So we still cause bloody wounds in animals, and those wounds are painful. And one of the kind of touch points for welfare-focused groups or welfare organisations is that, you know, we should minimise pain as much as we can. But how do we know if we're being effective unless we can measure the pain? In a human, you can ask them to speak about a scale of 1 to 10, but you can't do that with an animal, and especially a ruminant, because they're herd or flock animals and they're kind of innately stoic and they will mask pain as much as possible. So actually measuring pain is really, really difficult. If you develop a new painkiller, for instance, how do you know if it's working? Well, you need to try and measure whether it relieves the pain in the animals that are having a painful insult. But that's a very difficult thing to do, and that just always interested me. How can we do it better? And we still don't have perfect answers to that question.
Do we have new techniques on the horizon or new medications on the horizon that are looking promising in terms of pain relief?
Well, so those are two separate questions. New techniques for measuring pain, yeah, possibly. You know, there are always advancements in what we can do using technology in particular. Nowadays, there are all sorts of things. I mean, you can take a photograph of an animal's face or a video of an animal's face, and there's a scientific proven way to determine whether that animal is in pain and how much. But the best thing you can do with measuring pain is use several measures at once. If you're just focusing on one, you're probably not going to get as good an answer as if you use several, like some of the quantitative things, some of the more subjective things you can use, like behavioural measures. You can use something that's very specific, like a force plate analysis. You know, do the animals respond more or less to a stimulus once they've had a painkiller? That kind of thing. So yes, science is advancing reasonably well as far as techniques go. Are there new painkillers, or is there new pain relief on the horizon? I'm going to say at this stage, maybe, but probably only in the future, because when you think about the actual pharmacology, humans respond really well to things like opioids, but ruminants don't, for physiological and brain structural reasons. They just don't. So we don't have the option of using those painkillers that work really well. The only tools that we have are either local anaesthetics or non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. Local anaesthetics don't last long enough to provide sort of meaningful pain relief for chronic pain, and neither do non-steroidals. So the pain relief options we've got for ruminants are not wonderful, but still, they're there and they should be used. I've always thought that if we can't develop a new drug, why don't we make the drugs that we do have last longer? So that's one of our research focuses at MLA.
Any other particular research focus that you're involved with at MLA that other cattle vets might want to know about?
We do all sorts of things, and I think the opportunities for cattle vets are when it comes to the demonstration of science in action. You know, MLA's got a program called the Producer Demonstration Site Program, where we use several farms to demonstrate one piece of science in action. Let's say we find a way to facilitate the transition away from a mulesed flock of sheep to a non-mulesed flock of sheep, right? So what we need is farmers to demonstrate this in action. But vets are great to have on board because they can help facilitate and help with the measurement and do the treatments, and they've got that scientific underpinning to their training that gives them the know-how to set up experimental groups and just work with the farmers to demonstrate science in action. Because part of the problem of being a vet is that when you're a livestock vet, usually you're sort of third, fourth, or even fifth in line of the people that will be consulted by a farmer for advice about looking after the animals. Normally it's the farrier or the tractor salesman or something like that who'll be asked first. I mean, I'm being a little bit flippant here, but getting veterinary connection with farmers is not always easy, but something like what I'm referring to now through our demonstration site program is a great way to get vets involved.
And actually that has been a theme of the other interviews that we've done for this podcast series as well, is vets being included in that team and that production team at an early stage, and not just for crisis management, but getting in there at the beginning and being there for advice. Is that something that you would want to see happen more, or do you think it's happening enough already?
No, it's definitely not happening enough already. Livestock vets get used as emergency consults too much, but well-trained livestock vets have got way more to offer at the other end of the process. If vets can get involved in the prevention phase and the planning phase and sort of the disease monitoring phase, it's so much better than going out there to try and solve a problem that's already started. And that's where vets with the knowledge of not just how to preg test cows, but what the results mean, is so useful for producers, because a yes or no answer about whether a cow is pregnant is one thing. But if you can say, look, you're down to about sort of 75% pregnancy rate in this mob when really we should be around 90. Now let's look into why that might be. That's where the true value of livestock vets comes in, working with the farmers to solve problems. And sometimes the aim is that you just make small changes that make a big difference and don't cost the earth. And then vets will start to be thought of not as a cost to a business, but as an investment in a business. That's what we hope for.
So this particular episode is that the veterinary sector can take you to all sorts of places. Where's it taken you geographically, but also in terms of your career options?
I started in clinical practice, and that flowed through to my 5 years in the UK, which I loved. I mean, I got to work in so many places, not because they kept firing me and I had to move on, but only because locum work takes you to, everywhere. So that was really cool. But in the end, I did come back to Australia, and I spent another sort of 3 or 4 years in mixed practice on the south coast in Albany in Western Australia, which is a beautiful spot. It's magical, and I really loved practicing there. I had a happy life, and all the outdoor things that I like to do were there. And one morning it was my job to travel, I think it was about 50 kilometres to a dairy farm and do some work for them. And then it was just farm after farm for the rest of the day all across the southern region, and it was a beautiful spring day. It was perfect. And the visit that I had to the farm that morning was one of those perfect visits where the cows were doing the right thing and I was getting my diagnosis right, and when I had to treat something, it went well. Then we stopped and we had a cup of tea, and it was fresh milk from the dairy. And as I was driving down the drive to go to my next call, I just reflected on that day, and I thought, this is one of the best days that I've had in veterinary practice. And it really was perfect. And there was the opportunity to maybe even buy the practice I was working for, and I just thought, this is a great day in clinical practice. And then only seconds later I thought to myself, if this is as good as it gets, is it good enough for the rest of my career? And really quickly, I realised that the answer was no, and that what I wanted to do was be more challenged by other things, broader thinking, more exposure to industry, more connection with farmers, not just restricted to clinical practice. So it was on that day that I decided to go and study again and do a PhD in animal science. And fortunately, after that happened, I was appointed as an academic at Murdoch Uni. And, I spent 10 years then teaching cattle medicine to those students back at Murdoch and doing research. But, that research itself took me to Indonesia to work in the production systems there. And, there was quite a lot of travel around the country, and I got to meet not just other academics, but people in private industry with new technology to develop and sell. So, I was very fortunate to be exposed to the other side of veterinary practice, which is the industry that we work for. It was really cool. And now, working for MLA, I'm always on a plane now. I don't love flying, I must say, but I like to be where I'm going. So, that too is taking me to the UK again, Scotland, America for research. I'm fortunate to have gone through these 3 phases of my career, the clinical, the academic, and now the industry.
I guess just finally, this is the end of the last episode of the series. What would be your message to other cattle vets that are either starting out or a fairly early career at the moment? Is there any kind of salient message you'd want to get across to them?
So maybe start with a slightly negative thing. I think during the times when you look at your career and you feel stuck in what you're doing and not so satisfied, just know that for a fact you're not stuck, because with a couple of small changes or maybe even big ones, your career as a vet and a livestock vet can take a significant turn that will yield good things. It might take a bit of searching for, but you're never stuck. With our degree, we've got versatility and flexibility like no other degree that I know. The second thing is for vets in practice, my bit of advice for what it's worth is try not to get stuck in your own echo chamber of what you are doing and delivering for yourself, your business and your clients. Take every opportunity to keep learning. If you're not on a steep learning curve, find one. Being in the role that I'm in now has exposed me to the whole kind of machine that underpins this industry of ours, this production animal industry, and it is massive and extensive. And so in practice, take the opportunity to find those links to industry. Talk to people that are not vets. Go to animal science conferences, connect with the departments of agriculture, connect with private industry, because it keeps it interesting and exciting, and it makes you a better provider of the services that you want to provide to your clients.
Mike Laurence, thanks so much for speaking to me today.
That's a pleasure, Prue. Thank you for the invitation.
And that conversation with Dr. Michael Laurence rounds out our first series of this podcast. We'd love to hear what you think. Tell me what you liked, and also if there's anything else you'd want me to cover. The contact details are in the series show notes. This has been So I Heard, a podcast commissioned by the Australian Cattle Vets, a special interest group of the Australian Veterinary Association. Background briefings by Ian McDonald. Editing and post-production by Drew Radford at PodTalk. Music by Stuart Day. I'm Prue Adams. Thanks for listening.